I want to bring in my guests. I am joined with Dan Kovalik. Dan Kovalik is an award-winning journalist and political commentator. He's, at the very least, he was. This may be old. Are you still editor of the Middle East Discourse?
No, never have been actually.
What the hell? Dan, we butchered your bio.
That's okay. No, that's fine. No worries. No worries.
Why did you tell us that we were butchering your bio? And I'm
No.
saying
I
that.
don't remember you mentioning that before, but that's okay. No, but I am the author of the case for Palestine, why it matters, why you should care. So there you go.
Thank
Which
you. The case
is
for Palestine.
on bookshelves now.
I can't believe we butchered your bio like this. God, man, our producers sucked. I'm sorry. I'm just like, Jesus Christ. Thank you for joining me, man. I really do
I'm
appreciate
happy
it.
to be here. Always happy to be here.
Dan, what is going on the ground? It seems like they've resumed just murderous attacks. From my understanding, 60 to 70% of the 400, 500 people killed were children, which, again, this notion that, oh, Hamas has been reconstituted. I wonder why. You've killed you've been killing kids. What do you think is going to take place? Give us just the start to it, your assessment of what's happening on the ground currently.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right that, what I've seen is since the bombing began again in earnest, that over 700 people have been killed. As you say, the vast majority women and children. I saw something like 200 children at least. Um, and this follows, of course, over 2 weeks of laying siege to Gaza, right? In violation of the ceasefire, Israel has been preventing any aid from getting in, any food, any water, any medicine. And then they followed up with these bombings. So, first of all, we have to start with the fact that this is a mass slaughter of innocents. It has nothing to do with Hamas. Sadly, I think it has everything to do, and I think, frankly, it has very little to do with Israel's, interest even. It has everything to do with Netanyahu trying to save his political life. In fact, he was scheduled this week to go to court to answer charges on corruption, and he didn't have to go because he had restarted the war. Oh, quelle surprise, right? And a lot of Israelis are getting hip to this, that their economy, that their young people's lives in the IDF are being sacrificed on the altar of Netanyahu's political self
Mhm.
dealing.
Yeah, well, he's trying to save his ass,
He's
effectively.
trying to
I
save
mean,
his
he's
ass. Yeah, I mean,
yeah
not only politically, he's just trying to stay out of jail, and he's willing
out
to
of prison.
sacrifice his country, right, to do that. So, unfortunately, though, he has the full backing of Trump to do this. Apparently, he did check in with Trump before he started the bombing again. He got the green light from Trump. So this is a terrible thing. Obviously, we have to hope it doesn't last very long because, again, I don't know how long the people of Gaza can hold out. I mean, this has been a long period, again, of being without the basic necessities of life.
What would
Most
stop it,
people,
though? It's that
what's
part.
that?
I don't know what would stop. What would stop it? Like, what would
Yeah, well,
be?
that's a great question. I mean, I think the one thing that could stop it is internal dissent in Israel, that they don't have the stomach for this. Now, I mean, I was just listening to Electronic Intifada this morning. I don't know if you follow that, but they're very good, and they were just noting that whether the Israelis care about the Palestinians or not, what they do care about is the fact that their economy is collapsing. People don't want to fight anymore. The Israeli papers are talking about this, that the young men coming back from the front are broken. Many have committed suicide. Many are committing domestic abuse. And this should not be surprising, right? This is like Vietnam, when you go and you kill babies and you kill women and you abuse people, when you return, you're going to be an abuser. And that's what's happening on a large scale in Israel. So society's fragmenting. Both Hamas and the Yemenis got some shots off towards Tel Aviv. Ben Gurion Airport, which is the only airport in Israel, was disrupted because of the bombing. People are getting tired of this. Again, let's start from the premise that the whole idea of Israel was to have a safe haven for Jews, right? This is not a safe haven. This is not a happy place to live anymore.
Yeah.
And Israelis, many of them having, more than one passport, have choices. And they're going to choose to leave. And many have chosen to leave, and more are going to leave. And so that is what could end this. That on top of it, and this is where I think the protests come in and why they're important. Because in addition to all those things I just mentioned, the Israelis also realize they're hated in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That they don't have the love of the world, they don't have the respect of the world. Their athletic teams are being, boycotted. Entertainers aren't going to play for them in Israel. Again, what good is it to be an Israeli anymore? Is this really beneficial for me? They have to ask, right? When I could move to Europe or I could move to the United States with no problem. So all this combined is a huge pressure on Israel to end this. Now, of course, the negative there is that I think people like Netanyahu and others in the government do understand this, and they also think that, therefore, if they're going to do this ethnic cleansing, they got to get it over with now, right? That they have to fulfill that, and then they'll bring peace somehow to Israel, and they'll be able to save the Zionist project. But I don't think that's possible at this point. I don't think it can be saved.
I want to go to
So yeah.
no,
Mhm.
please continue.
No, that's it. Those are my thoughts.
Well, I want to go to Netanyahu for a moment because you brought up the trial, and Netanyahu is, if he gets out of government, he may go to jail. He may be put in a cage. One of the interesting things has to do with Shin Bet domestic intelligence chief being fired, and the Netanyahu government firing that Shin Bet chief that was investigating Netanyahu. Just for an American audience, it would be as if, let's say, somebody was investigating, let's say Trump or a government official, and the government turns around and fires the government official that's investigating them in order to prevent the case from going forward. That is amazing. That was part of the reason that the people were protesting. And to your point, Israel had 8 million people? And in some of those protests, you had 1/8 of those people on the streets, angry at either them trying to undercut the judiciary, or in this case, destroy an investigation into Netanyahu himself over issues of corruption and anything else that Netanyahu has done. What's going on with that? I mean, there have been protests for the last 2 days. I'd imagine those protests are going to continue. Some people brought up the issue of civil war, saying Israel has all sorts of contradictions, one of which settlers, in relation to the government itself. Like if the government pulls back, those settlers are not accepted. But the other one has to do with like just internal dissent over issues like this, where they're supposed to be living in this quote unquote democracy, as they call it, while simultaneously the leader of that democracy, ostensibly the head, Netanyahu, is corrupt as can be and doing any and everything to his power to avoid having to answer for that corruption, even firing the person who's investigating him. That's amazing, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
you don't like that. You don't like.
yeah, it shows how tenuous his hold on power is. It shows how divided the country is. And by the way, there's a few other, concerns that people have. The protesters, one big one is that they know that if this war goes on much longer in Gaza, the hostages will not live. Right? You can't lay siege to Gaza for 2 weeks, then start bombing the heck of it out of it, and expect that the hostages that are there are going to survive. And so that's another big concern. And people realize that Netanyahu doesn't give a darn about the hostages. They know that in terms of October 7th, that he knew in advance that was going to happen. He didn't defend the country. In fact, he ordered the Hannibal directive, which meant that the Israeli Defense Forces shot at their own people. So that's part of the scandal too. I mean, October 7th itself is a huge scandal in Israel, much more than it is here. I mean, interestingly, the papers in Israel are much more honest about what's happening and what happened on October 7th in our own papers. So all this combined means that people hate Netanyahu and they feel that he's a traitor. In fact, there was a high level military officer who said he won't go fight in Gaza. He said, I'm not going to fight for traitors.
Wow.
And they do view, Netanyahu as a traitor, and they should. Again, he is sacrificing Israel for his own purposes, and he is sacrificing the hostages for his own purposes. And again, in Israel, they get it. In the U.S., we continue to be pumped with a lot of propaganda about this. But again, in Israel, I'd say that they have a much better, kind of flow of information on this stuff.
But they seem to be on board for this. I mean, like when I was in Israel, there is no left wing in Israel. All those people
That's
are
true.
fascists. And it's like you have a fascist country that hates Palestinians. I mean, hates them. And so it's like, it seems like the government and the population is on board for this. I mean, they may want the hostages back. That's true. But for all intents and purposes, whether it's going into Syria, whether it's killing, people in the West Bank, whether it's killing people in Lebanon, whether they don't seem to care. They seem to be fully aligned and on board with what the government is doing. I mean, in fact, Netanyahu's popularity, I remember at one point, was in the toilet after October 7th. Not anymore. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, again, I think what you're going to see is, kind of a bell curve on this. That, yeah, it's always true when a leader starts a war that they will have a boost in popularity. But I believe at this point, his popularity is going down because, again, not because the people of Israel, by and large, care about Arabs or Palestinians, but they are wondering when Israel gets to go back to some modicum of
Normality.
normalcy.
Yeah.
When they get to go back to business, when they get to fly out of Ben Gurion Airport freely without fear of being bombed. When the airlines will come back, right? Because many airlines are still not flying there. When they get to be invited back to the community of nations, right? Because now they're a pariah. I mean, again, out of total self-interest, they're wondering, what is being offered to us except endless wars. And by the way, Trump won in the United States in part because people here feel the exact same way about our wars. And he seemed to promise that he wanted to end those wars. Now, he seems to have now totally reneged on those promises. But the point is, his base seemed to want that, even though the MAGA base probably doesn't care a lot about Iraqis or, whatever, but they do care about what these wars are doing at home. And I think in Israel, that's true as well, that they think that this is not the life they want. Again, Israel was supposed to be the safe haven for Jews. It's not safe anymore. And as long as they're at war like this, it won't be safe and it won't be prosperous. And now they're paying higher taxes. and social taxes because the government is running out of money and
Mhm.
thousands of businesses have closed. Again, out of self interest, these wars are becoming unpopular. Um, I think had Netanyahu been able to have a quick win over Hamas and Hezbollah, then yeah, the Israelis would have been fine with it, but it isn't quick, We're now
It's
heading,
two
what is it?
years,
We're in now what,
nearly 2 years.
18? Yeah, a year and a half, I guess
Yeah,
now.
a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and that's a long time given the toll this is taking on their society and economy, and it's just going to get worse. Again, now Yemen's firing rockets at them, and they may awaken the Hezbollah bear at some point, and then they have a real problem. So,
But they beat that bear. That
well,
bear was
yes,
beaten to submission.
to some extent, yes, but on the other
And I'll go
hand,
further. Just real quick, just to interrupt. Also, there was no way for him to have a quick win. I mean, Netanyahu, the way he staked out what a win was, Hamas doesn't exist. That's the way he staked out his war
right,
plan. We are going to do this, and we're going to destroy Hamas. That's what he said. So the fact that Hamas still exists, and not just still exists, was going to be part of the government potentially in any kind of peace settlement or ceasefire deal, meant that any ceasefire deal meant he lost. Like meaning, like under his terms, you could not have a ceasefire if Hamas was going to be in government. Now the catch, and I guess the thing that shows this to be a bit ludicrous, is that yet Hamas said we will step back from government if we can go into the second phase of the ceasefire agreement. Meaning, for all of the talk about what Hamas is, they have been more willing to make a deal, more open to make changes, and Israel is like, yeah, we don't care. We don't care. As you point out, it's not about Hamas. But I'm sorry, please. I'm
no,
sorry. I
and I
digress.
agree with you. No, I agree with you. It isn't about Hamas. It's never been about Hamas. Um,
I guess my thing was there was no way to have a quick win in the
well,
way that
that's
he
true,
stayed out
but
of claim.
it's true though. The problem with the Israelis is they have all these myths, and one myth is that they have this undefeatable army, and I do think people did think it could be done quicker than it has
Mm-hmm.
been. So what the reality is and what people think the reality is are many times two very different things. And going back to Hezbollah, I mean, first of all, Israel gained, while they certainly had some tactical victories over Hezbollah, Hezbollah still exists.
Mm-hmm.
Hezbollah exacted a huge toll on Israel. They drove all those settlers out of the northern border of Israel, and those people haven't returned. So that's a big deal for Israel. Netanyahu really hoped those people would return. They have not. Now,
Mm-hmm.
during the ceasefire with Lebanon, Israel has gained ground in South Lebanon because Hezbollah has not fought them because they have honored the ceasefire while Israel has not. But I don't think that means Hezbollah is finished or that they couldn't take them on if they had to. I think they've been regrouping, rearming, recruiting. I mean, you saw how many people showed up for Nasrallah's funeral. I mean, they have a
Oh,
lot of
massive.
support, yeah, in
Yeah.
Lebanon, around the world. So again, that's another X factor that Israel has to take into account. Right now, they are fighting in Gaza, or the way they're fighting through aerial bombardment, they're basically being able to do what they want at will. But that's not going to continue. Um, so all those things combined, I hope, will put pressure on Israel to pull back. Um, but again, at the same time, the logic of Israel, which is a settler colonial country, will
Expansion.
demand that it continue to try to push the Palestinians out. I mean, that will
Mm-hmm.
continue to be a goal.
I
But
just don't
whether
know how
they
you
can,
accomplish that goal. It's a million, 1.2 million people. Like,
Well, no, well, it's in Gaza alone. It started at 2.3 million.
okay,
It's probably still at well over 1.5 million, and then you have the West Bank as well, which I'm not off the top of my head. I'm not sure what the population is, but it's larger than that even. So
right,
you're talking millions of people, which yeah, to get rid of them all would mean mass
killing.
killings and whatnot. But I think, and yeah, they can't do it all at once, and the question is whether they can continue trying at this moment, given what's happening within Israeli society.
I guess my thing is they can't do it at all. What I mean by that is the population of Gaza has increased, not decreased. So if the objective was to, okay, we're going to kill all of these people or expel all of these people, okay, well, they failed at that task. And they failed at that task for years. And so you've just had this kind of frozen struggle where effectively you can only kill so many people at any particular time, but you can never kill enough to take all the territory, which is why I don't see how this works. Like, for one, I don't want to go back to October 7th, meaning I don't want a situation similar to October 7th in the way, or the things that created October 7th, to be specific. By the same token, I don't see them doing anything. Israel doesn't seem to be on board for a deal. Hamas has been pleading for a deal. I mean, even to the point, hey, we will literally take a backseat in the political space, providing you allow the second phase of the deal to go through. And they're like, nope, we're not interested. Trump backs Israel in this. Well, they do whatever they want. Miriam Adelson gave you $100 million. So, that money has to mean something. And they just allow them to do what they do. And this fool's errand of we're going to kill or expel this 5 million people seems absurd. They don't have the capability to do it.
Well, I
So
mean,
this,
God, yeah, I mean,
no,
I pray to God they don't, of
yeah,
course. At the same time, in Gaza, I think the population there is in grave risk of having a mass casualty event from disease, starvation. You already see babies freezing to death, dying of starvation. I mean, they really have driven that population to the verge of extinction. I mean, and that is an awful thing, and that the international community has allowed that to happen is terrible. But the point is, I'm not sure in the case of Gaza that they couldn't pull that off, given what they've already brought them to. You have 90% of the people are living in tents, right?
mhm,
Um, again, without food, without water. I mean, there's no water. There is no potable water. And Israel's destroyed all of their desalinization, uh,
the
machines.
plants, yeah.
They have poisoned their aquifers. I mean, you can't live without water, and I just, I do worry about a mass casualty event in Gaza and Israel's ability to pull that off. And that's why someone has to do something to stop this. They can't just keep watching this happen.
Well, that part has been the most shocking to me. Like, if you ask me, hey, could there be a genocide today? I'll be like, no, no way. It's like we've had the Nazi genocide that's too ingrained in people's minds. Um, and yet, every day you see it, babies dying, women getting killed, drones killing babies or children, 6-year old little girls. And you look at that and you see it day after day after day, where not just could a genocide happen, we are watching it. And there is no real response to it. The world just is
Yeah.
like, oh, that's so bad. And they go about their way. It is super weird to me that social media has created this dynamic where you can effectively see this stuff and yet have no capacity to do anything about the thing that you're watching. And the governments that you would think ideally would care don't. They give lip service, but they don't do anything. And it seems like the only thing that would do anything is military power. All of them are scared to use it. That's assuming they even have it to use, um, in that way. Why do you think this is the case? Is it just the leadership class don't really care about the Palestinians? They just care about business. And so they have to give lip service to pacify their populations. But all things being equal, it's not what they care about. Like, what do you think is the reason that inhibits their actions? Or is it fear? These quizzlings of the US?
I think it's self-interest and fear of losing funding from the United States, from the West, uh, fear of war. But the thing is, it wouldn't take military intervention to stop it. If Turkey just stopped supplying oil to Israel that's coming from Azerbaijan, um, that would stop Israel. They need that oil. I mean, if there was an oil embargo on Israel, they could not prosecute this war. The Arab world and the Turkish, they could stop it simply by doing that, as they did in 1973 with the world oil embargo. They could do it.
Mhm.
It wouldn't take anything except to withhold the oil,
And
and they
yet
won't
Turkey doesn't
even
do
do
it.
that. They won't even do that. And that is where the real betrayal is. That they won't even do the you know.
Oil embargo. What changed from the 70s in this case? Because as you pointed out, they did it in the 70s. In fact, they did it against us. Well, I remember seeing it on video film, like these cars lined up because they couldn't get gas because of the oil embargo that these countries did. Why not now? Is it just the relationships have changed? What the leaderships in these countries wants have changed? What's the difference between an
Yeah,
oil
well,
embargo
you
at this
had
time?
some real leaders in the Arab world, like Nasser, a secular leader in Egypt who was willing to take risks to help the Palestinians and to fight for African and Arab, nationalism. Of course, leaders like that have been systematically undermined and destroyed by the West, right? If the truth is, if you had a Gaddafi in power in Libya and you had a Saddam Hussein in Iraq right now, and you had an Assad in Syria, whether you like those guys or not, it would have changed the calculus about how that part of the world was responding. But all those people been eliminated. The other thing, guess what was eliminated, my friend, was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics.
Yes.
Azerbaijan was a Soviet republic. They would not
Yeah.
be providing oil right now for Israel. And
So
so
world change.
the West has gotten rid of those people and those governments and those societies that were that supported the anti-colonial movements
Mhm.
and that were a backstop against Western imperialism. All that's been systematically destroyed, and now you see the results of it.
Wow. Effectively, Israel can do whatever it wants because they rooted out any government that would have done anything to stand in their way of doing whatever they're doing.
That's exactly right. That's
Oh,
exactly right.
that is wild. Do you think that was happenstance?
No,
Mm.
that was all intended.
Yeah.
And how do we know this was intended? Because let's go back to General Wesley Clark. Remember his prognostication that was based on conversations that he was privy to in 2001 that the US was going to overthrow 7 countries, including Libya, Iraq, Syria, the ones I just mentioned to you, right?
Mhm.
Lebanon, Iran, which they're still trying to do. And I got two more. I think Somalia was one, and there was
Or
a
Sudan
seventh,
or something. Yeah.
maybe Sudan, and
Yeah.
Sudan, which they did, which now has become Sudan and South Sudan, and that's a complete disaster. So yes, we know this was all according to plan, and that was going to be done, one, to help Israel, right? To get rid of all of those leaders who support the Palestinians, and it was going to be done to give the West an ability to dominate the Middle East. And guess what? It's been done for the most part. You still have Iran that stands. You have Yemen. You have Hezbollah, weaken Hezbollah, and that's about it, right? So they've largely accomplished what they wanted to accomplish, and to the great detriment of the people of the region. By the way, we should mention. I mean, you have to mention that there's a genocide that's been taking place in Syria at the hands of the government that the West installed. This Al
Yes.
Qaeda government has killed thousands of people. And by the way, I'm in communication with people from Syria every day. You know, that was being limited mostly to the coastal regions of Syria, Latakia, Tartus. Now it's coming to Damascus. They're starting to kill Alawites there
I
and
heard they were going
Christians.
from door to door and killing and taking the property. Um,
Yes,
yeah.
like the Passover, like the biblical Passover. People are literally writing on their doors Sunni to try to prevent their homes from being invaded by these HTS forces. And again, what kind of coverage is this getting in the West, and who cares?
None.
No
In
one.
fact, they're removing sanctions off of Jelani.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, Annalena Baerbock hosted Jelani as they were going door to door, murdering people. And as
Yes.
that was being reported that they were doing that. It's just
And
astonishing. And by the way, I'm
it's
saying reported
astonishing.
not on main channels, just on people who are covering and who are there, who are pointing out, hey, they're going to door killing people.
Yeah. No, we live in dark times, my friend.
Donald Trump is starting a war in Yemen. This feels so ridiculous to me on two levels. One, Trump came in, I'm going to end wars, not start them. There's that. Two, Yemen is a direct response to Gaza, meaning they're not doing it for their health. They're doing it because they feel somebody needs to intervene into what is happening. And their way of doing so, their way of exerting power is we are going to blow up any ship in the Red Sea that is helping Israel in any way. And that's what they've done. They've been able to bring Red Sea shipping to a crawl. Kudos on that, I suppose. The issue with Yemen is to deal with the issue of Israel, something that Trump said he was going to do when he looked Muslim leaders in the eye. I'm going to end this war. And then gives us fake into the war in regards to this quote unquote temporary ceasefire that was always meant to go back into operation, according to what Netanyahu said. That Trump was like, hey, you can always restart once you get the hostages back. Hamas realized, okay, we're being had, and effectively said, okay, well, we will participate in this process, but we need you to live up to your own end of the deal, in which case they did. In which case, you get the issue with Yemen once again. Now, from my understanding, as long as the ceasefire was in effect, Yemen had not fired anything, meaning Yemen had effectively said,
That's
okay, as long
correct.
as the ceasefire in play, fair game. We will leave it. We won't get involved. Ceasefire is in play. The world is good. Ceasefire goes away. And I don't think they still fired anything. I think they started that attack on Yemen before Yemen had did anything.
Yeah,
And
Yemen had
so,
done nothing. All they had done, and all they had threatened to do, they hadn't threatened to fire any missiles. All they threatened to do is to prevent Israeli ships from passing through the Red Sea. And that was in response to Israel's, preventing aid from getting into Gaza, which was in
yes,
violation of the ceasefire. And they gave them notice. They gave them, I think, like a 5 days warning. If you don't start allowing aid in, we're going to start stopping your ships. And it was just in response to that threat that Trump started bombing Yemen and mostly killing civilians in Yemen. And so it was completely unwarranted what he was doing. And again, the press in the U.S. pretend that Yemen somehow deserved it. But
one of my
that's
audience,
ridiculous.
I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a slight lag. I'm sorry. That's my fault. One of my audience members pointed out that they were still firing during ceasefire. Is that true? I didn't
No,
think they
so,
were.
I see someone saying they were blocking sea lanes during the ceasefire. Look, I am not aware that they were doing that, but let's assume they were. That still would not justify bombing Yemen, especially civilian targets, including a cancer center.
Right.
There, under international law, there's such a thing as proportionality. You're supposed to only have use force that's proportional to whatever harm is being caused.
Hmm.
It has to be done through necessity, and also in terms of self-defense, you're only allowed self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter in the case of an armed attack, which Yemen was not involved in. None of the things. So even if they were blocking the sea lanes, which again I don't know that they were, that would not justify bombing
A hospital.
the country of Yemen.
Yeah.
And again, all those things have been forgotten. There are limits to what you're allowed to do. Um, and you know, when has Yemen ever bombed the United States? Right? The U.S. has been bombing Yemen for years. Biden bombed Yemen 1,000 times.
Wow.
Obama supported Saudi Arabia to bomb Yemen.
Green light. Yep. Getting green light.
Even W bombed Yemen. How many times has the Yemen bombed the United States? Not once, 0 times. Okay? We now have it in our minds, well, because we've been groomed to think this since the founding of the United States. No one has a right of self-defense against us, right? But we're able to attack others at will, and that's just lunacy. But that's where our mentality's at this point.
See, I never believed there were limits. I never believed international law was even real. From my take, a law that can't be defended, it's not really a law. And there's nothing, there's no, as Mark would say, a leviathan over anything short of the barrel of a gun and your power to use it. That was the way I always looked at the stuff. This is still barbaric.
Yeah,
I just
well, I think, look, I mean, and I'm a lawyer, and I'm an international lawyer. I taught international human rights law for 12 years. But even as I taught it, I felt a lot of what you're saying. That is to
yeah,
say that, yeah, the law is on the books, but it's not enforced. To the extent it's enforced in a very selective way.
yes.
And yeah, so it's very easy to feel that way. And but at the same time, there are those laws, and I think at least we need to point to them and say, look, these are laws that everyone agreed to,
Standard.
that the U.S. agreed to, that the U.S. not only agreed to, it helped create. The UN helped write the UN Charter,
Mhm.
right? The UN was one of the founding members of the United Nations, and you're right. These things tend to be honored in the breach, but we have to, I think, push for that rule of law. I mean, the UN Charter was signed in San Francisco. Did you know
Yep.
that? Anyway, but I hear you. I hear you. You're right. I mean, no law is good without there being remedies for
Mhm.
violations of it, right? And right now there appear to be virtually none.
Uh, I, the United Nations, I'm glad you brought that up. And by the way, I'm saying no law or no such thing as international law. I'm not saying that as a critique of the fact that you're an international lawyer. That's not,
No, that's
it's
fine.
just,
I
okay, yeah.
take
It's
no
just,
offense. You're
okay,
talking
fair enough.
truth. The
Yeah.
reality is the reality, right?
It just seems like they don't get enforced. It's like, okay,
Well, they
what is,
don't.
but I agree with you that the standard still should be set. There should be something
Yeah,
you point to that, hey, we've agreed upon this. This is bad.
right.
Because at some point, maybe there is a Leviathan in that sense that is honest, that functions on a supranational level. I don't think a superpower would ever accept that, though.
Well, it's true. I mean, it appears they won't because they feel that they're powerful enough not to need the law, not to have to abide by it.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, the interesting thing is that Yemen is really the only country right now that is trying to enforce the Genocide Convention. I mean, what they're doing, they say they're doing in order to stop the genocide in Gaza. To that
Yeah.
extent, I feel they should be applauded. You know, they're called terrorists. In fact, they're the ones trying to stop the terror. And
The actual
that's,
genocide. Yeah.
and
How
by the way,
ironic
through
is that?
fairly nonviolent means, you know, by
Mhm.
stopping ships,
How
again,
ironic is that?
like
They're the terrorists.
they should be applauded. Um, but we live in an upside down world, you know.
You mentioned the United Nations, and I'm glad you did. Does the General Assembly have any remedy for what is taking place in regards to because the General Assembly overwhelmingly, I think it might have been 2 or 3 states, America, Israel, and some rando island that voted with the US for political favor. All of them were against what Israel is doing. So does the General Assembly itself have any power? I know the UN Security Council, the US and Europe is going to veto whatever comes up in that sense. What about the US? What about the General Assembly?
Yes, they have something called, and a lot of people been, well, I don't hear this as much, but earlier on in the genocide in Gaza, people were calling for uniting for peace. You could General Assembly can pass a uniting for peace resolution to essentially override the Security Council in the event the Security Council is not doing something to
Mhm.
enforce international law. And in the case of a genocide, for example, serious human rights violations, a serious international crisis, the General Assembly does have the power to pass a uniting for peace resolution to order some sort of
Remedy.
action to stop
Mhm.
that genocide. And the fact they haven't done it to me is just baffling. It's absolutely baffling. Again, and it shows the lack of courage, that the world has to address the situation because they have the power to do it. And they have the votes. As you say, they should have the votes to do it, but they haven't done this. But that is something that people have been pushing. One guy who's really been advocating this is Sam Husseini from
Yes, he is
DC. That's,
fantastic. Yeah,
yeah,
he's
he's
fantastic.
fantastic, a Palestinian American. He's been pushing for this. This has been his kind of mantra since October 7th, but no one's listening, unfortunately.
Why not? Like, if all of them, like, that's what gets me about this. If all of these people look at this and say, okay, this is a genocide, are they doing it for virtue signaling reasons? Like, meaning, if they really believe that, and you have all of these nations around the world saying this is outrageous, this shouldn't happen, how does that not happen? How does the General Assembly of the United Nations not get involved? I mean, it makes me feel like it's a pointless entity, that it doesn't matter, that it doesn't, like they would drag Duterte from Philippines into the International Criminal Court. Netanyahu literally came to the US. Like he's literally traveling around the world.
And he was cheered. He was cheered in
And
Congress,
cheered. And
what,
cheered.
hundreds of times or something. Yeah, for murdering. Again, I mean, yeah, the rule of law is broken down. The United Nations has broken down as a force in the world. I can't deny any of that. It's all true. I think the world feels cowed by the United States, which has shown it will use military power whenever it wants to get its way. And
It
I
can't
think there's
attack the entire United Nations.
no.
Like, what is it going to do? Attack the world?
Well, that's a good question. Well, right now they have a third of the world under U.S. economic sanctions, which are pretty brutal. So yeah, I think they do feel that way, But obviously, they need to stand up. They need to stand up to this.
Dan, man, I always appreciate you. Thank you for joining me. I really do.
Always my pleasure. Always
I
my
found
pleasure.
myself shocked by this issue. Um, I just cannot process that we watch this and can do nothing about it.
It's heartbreaking, my friend, but we shouldn't give up hope. We need to keep spreading the word, pushing these issues. It's all we can do.
Dan, Dan Kovalik. He is an award-winning journalist, political commentator. And Dan, 2 things. Where can people find you? And the name of your book, Palestine Case for Peace. Where can people
Yeah.
find it?
Yeah, thank you. So it's called The Case for Palestine, Why It Matters, Why You Should Care. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it through my publisher, skyhorsepublishing.com. That's published most of my books. I have, I think, 8 books I've done. I'm now writing a new book with Jeremy Kuzmarov called Syria, Anatomy of a Regime Change. And you can find me on Twitter at Daniel M. Kovalik.
Very cool. Daniel, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll see you
You be
soon.
safe. Have a good
My
one.
fellow Trekkie. Thank you. Cheers.
Have a good one, my man.
You
Thank
too.
you.
All righty. Bye-bye.
All right. Always appreciate Dan joining me. Always enjoy these